lets us evaluate and make edits or transform records. We are not going to cover today how to download and install MarcEdit because from the questionnaire responses, which we really appreciate getting ahead of time, it seems that most of you have done that. However, we will have a link to, later in the slide deck to the download page.
Sorry, there are a few other things that we learned from the webinar planning questionnaire. And one is that several of you are interested in how or if MarcEdit uses regular expression language. And the answer is yes, you can use regular expression in MarcEdit to transform your data. A few others asked if SRU or Z39.50 can be used in MarcEdit. And again, the answer is yes. You can use either of those communication standards with MarcEdit. However, as this is a getting started level webinar, those topics are somewhat advanced. We're not going to cover them today. But if you are familiar with using regular expression, you can find tutorials and examples on it from MarcEdit's opening screen. If you are not familiar with regular expression language, that MarcEdit is not a tool to teach you how to use regular expression or tell you how it works. Likewise, if you already know how to set up Z39.50 or SRU for communicating MARC data, then it is straightforward to get those up and running in MarcEdit.
Okay, Jackie, can you advance, please? All right, so we're on to our use case walkthroughs. We went ahead and pre-recorded the demos to show you how we think you might want to use MarcEdit and certainly how we use it in our setting. We pre-recorded the demos, both video and some screen captures to make sure we weren't tempting technology to fail all of us during this live webinar. So we're going to go ahead and cover some common uses of MarcEdit. If Jackie will roll the video, please. I guess you have to unmute Jackie, right?
I did unmute.
From the File Explorer, I have navigated to the directory where my .mrc file is saved. To open it, I'll double-click on the file and launch MarcEdit's MarcBreaker tool. Duke University Libraries ILS requires the default character encoding for MARC files to be UTF-8. You'll see that in the character encoding, acquire a UTF file from the vendor, I could use the translation options here to translate a MARC8 file to UTF-8. Similarly, if your ILS requires MARC8 and you receive a UTF-8 file, you can translate UTF to MARC8. By clicking execute, I am now asking MarcEdit to convert my file of MARC records into MARC mnemonic or .mrk format, which then allows me to open them in an editor and act upon the records, or even just view them in a way that's easy for me to see. You'll notice that the MARC Tools window lets the user know how many records were processed. And this is a very quick and easy way to check and make sure that the expected number of records that were in your file did get processed or truly are present in your file. By hitting Edit Records, I open the MARC Editor, which lets me see my records. I usually do a couple of quick checks at this point. This most current version of MarcEdit makes it very easy to double check that, in fact, the default character encoding is what you need it to be. You'll see that right under the menus, there is a toolbar that lets me know that the records are in UTF-8. Past versions of MarcEdit didn't have this function, and so you have to rely on the leader coding to make sure that records were in the correct encoding for your ILS. I also, at this point, use the reports menu, the field count option, to make sure that fields that are critical for successfully loading my file are present. So for Duke, that means a match point, so that files of records from our print outsourcing vendors match our acquisition level records in the ILS. In this file of records for Arabic language resources that our vendor provided, we have asked the vendor to include the Duke University barcode as the match point in the records, and to encode that information in an 852 field. So I can quickly scroll down my list of fields that appear in the record set and ascertain that there are in fact 247 occurrences of the 852 field found in 247 records. So in other words, every record in this file has the required 852 field. I also like to validate MARC records at this preliminary stage, and recommend it highly to everyone who's going to use MARCEdit in their library. You can go back to the reports menu and choose the MARC validator, or you can go to tools and use validate MARC records. Both options open the MARC validator tool, which then runs validation rules against the source file that you have open, the current file that you have open. I accept the default MARC validation rules that are included in MARCEdit because they are in line with the MARC 21 standard. But if you had special needs in your library to validate records differently, you can always edit the rules file. You can group results by error type when you run MARC validation. I'll be honest and say I don't do this. Normally my files aren't large. The files that I'm working with aren't very, very large, don't contain too many errors. So it's not a hardship for me to look at errors ungrouped, but I can see that this might be very handy if you're working with an extremely large file and you foresee having a higher number of errors. So by clicking OK, I run the MARC validation rules and get a report of a results list of errors that were encountered. You can go to a specific record to examine the error more closely, or even to fix it by clicking on the links next to each record number. At this point, for me in my workflow, I don't usually examine errors more closely or fix them. I'm still in the middle of doing other kinds of assessment, but I do want to save the information in this results report and go back to it later. So to do that, you can click on the copy icon at the bottom of the results window. The data in the results list is copied to a clipboard, and then you can place it in a file. Usually for me, that means a notepad file, and go back to it later.
You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, Zoom and Jackie told me at the same time, you're muted. Thank you. So I just wanted to say before going on to our next topic, I want to reiterate how valuable the validation tool in MARCEdit is, and highly recommend that it really be one of your very first steps when you're working with a file. You want to make sure that in your files, you don't have frequency or gravity of errors that really makes the file unusable. And if you do have a lot of errors or very serious errors, then that's a feedback point that you can give to your vendor who provided the file. And I just also wanted to note that under the MARC validation bullet list, Jackie and I have listed some of the files that are very frequently and commonly loaded in our technical services division, specifically by Jackie's department. And these sustain really large scale workflows in our library. So validation of the files is key, since we don't want to introduce errors into the ILS and subsequently into the public catalog with these large, very frequent files. Next slide, please.
From the File Explorer, I have navigated to the directory where my .mrc file is saved.
Is that the last one?
Yeah, that's the last one. I think we have a screen capture only on. There we go.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you, Jackie. So I wanted to talk next about joining MARC files. There's functionality in MARC Edit that lets you pull together multiple files into one file. I regularly have multiple files that need to be evaluated or processed in the same way. And in order to avoid having to assess and examine files individually, perhaps do some transformation, but I don't do as much of that now, but sometimes I do. But in order to avoid having to do that all individually, I use MARC Edit's join tool to concatenate files into multiple files into one file. So in these screenshots, I'm just trying to show you where you can find the MARC join tool. It's available from the main MARC Edit window when you open the program. And then once you select the MARC join utility, it leads you through a dialog box, leads you through the process of joining files. The main thing to remember is that when you are joining files, you have to first define the directory and file name where you want the newly created joined file to live. And I also want to note that over the course of my 10 or so years, I've joined files, both small and large, large being sometimes tens of thousands of records getting joined into one file. And though large files can take longer to process, couple minutes, maybe even a few minutes. Sometimes the tool works really well for both large and small. Okay, next slide, please, Jackie. All right, and next I want to show you what I do with exporting data from MARC records using MARC Edit. And I do want to say before we run the video, I apologize that in the video I sometimes say text delimited file. I meant tab delimited. I kept saying the wrong thing, so apologies for that.
To export MARC records to a text delimited file, visit the Tools menu in the main window of MARC Edit, choose the Export function, and then choose Export tab delimited records. Step 1 begins with letting MARC Edit know which source file you would like to use. So I will navigate to one of the demo files that Jackie and I prepared for this presentation. It is based on a working file that I've recently used to load records into Duke's ILS. Now that I've chosen my file, I have to let MARC Edit know where I would like it to save the tab delimited or text delimited file. I usually select the same directory where the source file is saved, but of course you can define any directory you prefer. So name your file. Next, you can select a field delimiter if you so desire. I usually accept the default tab delimited text. By clicking the Next button, MARC Edit then lets you articulate which fields you would like the report to show you. The file that I'm currently using in this demo is from a print outsourcing vendor, so I routinely look to make sure that call numbers are structured correctly, that our barcode data is correct in the file. So I am going to ask MarcEdit first to show me the title field, because I like to have a main field as an anchor in any report. You can scroll down the list to find your field tag. It's a long list. Pardon the scrolling. And then you can add your field. By clicking add field at this point without any subfields articulated, you will get the entire 245 field. If you want a partial field only, you can let MarcEdit know which subfield to present to you in the report from a specific field. Next, I want to look at call number data. So another option, instead of scrolling down the long list, is to type the field tag that you want to see. I will ask it to show me 050 fields. And then finally, I'm interested in barcode data, which I know for Duke in our requirements lives in an 852 field. So I add my fields, and once I'm done adding, I click the export button, and I get a message that my data has been exported to my specified directory. And click OK and close. And at this point, I will have a text delimited file, which then I can use Excel to open, and it'll provide a view of the data for me that helps me with further evaluation and assessment, or to parse out records for catalogers on my team to help me evaluate.
Okay, so I think last topic for me for now is extracting records. MarcEdit also has a function that lets you select records from your file or extract them and look at them separately. So extracting MARC records has been a really useful tool for me as I prepare new files for loading, and in particular when I work with new vendors and I'm assessing their files. I've used the extracting records functionality to generate random samples for assessing cataloging. I've also used it to extract a very small subset of records from the main file, like even just one or two, to test loading into the ILS, make sure it's working without having to load the whole file. And I've also sometimes used it to isolate records that I know are going to cause a problem upon load, so I can deal with them separately. The screenshot on this slide provides a view of the select records for edit function that is accessible from the file menu in the MarcEdit editor. So when you have a file open, as we saw in the first video, and you can go to file, choose select records to edit. Be aware that one thing that this functionality will ask you to do guides you nicely through the process, but it'll ask you to start by importing the file that you want to select records from. That's usually the file that you already have open, but you do have to tell MarcEdit to import that file into this tool. I also think it's important that you know that unless you choose the option to delete selected, the records will remain in the source file, and or I should say the source file will remain intact, and the records that you select will be kind of copied into a new file. You can use the checkboxes to the left of the numbered list of records to select records you want to edit, or you can use the search function kind of in the middle of the box to enter criteria that you want to use to select the records. So basically searching by elements and fields within the records to select them. And I do also want to mention that if you use the option to export random to create a random sample of records, the first thing that MarcEdit will ask you to do is to assign a percentage of the records that you would like to be used to generate the random samples. So it gives you flexibility to decide kind of what your sample size is going to be. How big a random sample do you want to feel confident in your assessment? All right. And with that, I think, Jackie, you're on deck.
Thanks, Natalie. So obviously Natalie's already discussed the reasons why we assess records and how she does the assessment for her work. I'm going to talk about, in these pre-recording videos, some of the things I've actually done using the batch edit tools in MarcEdit for some of the reasons listed in the slide. And then I'm going to show you how to create and manage tasks in MarcEdit, so you don't always have to do every action one by one. You can reuse actions, you reuse tasks. I've done all of these things in MarcEdit using the batch edits, but I'm not going to show them all to you today because we do not have enough time to go through them all. We can correct invalid fields or subfields. We can add data. We can just put the proxy prefix in. So you don't have to add a whole field or a subfield. Sometimes you can just add textual information into the records before you load them into the ILS. I'm going to show you a few tools that you can use after you've assessed. They're in the tools menu, not too surprising. And there's quite a few here. I'm just going to show you a couple that I use most often. And so let's say, like me, you have, sorry, I don't know why that didn't pop to full screen. I'm going to fix that. I think I can fix that. Sorry, Natalie, how did that not work?
Yeah, I know. We had it set to play back at full screen, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
Let's see. Sorry, y'all.
Sorry about this.
Technology still.
It's still failed. Yep.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. I'll fix it. You're gonna have to see the slideshow for a second, though. This is how you do that. If you ever have to do this, this little checkbox right here, and then it should work as planned. I'm going to show you a few tools. Sorry about that you can use after you've assessed. They're in the tools menu, not too surprising. And there's quite a few here. I'm just going to show you a couple that I use most often. And so let's say, like me, you have a file from a vendor. You might have done some outsourcing for some titles, or maybe you downloaded a set of records from a provider, and you often get these files like monthly or weekly, and you need to update them to work in your library's ILS and with your local workflows and data flows. Something we often do is to change the system number from the vendor's system number. So because those numbers aren't controlled, we might accidentally hit our own system number and accidentally overwrite something. And we don't want to do that. But we don't want to throw away the system numbers either, because we might need to overlay these records later. So we run our services in our ILS and match on a 901 field, which is just a local field we have set up to use as a match point. And so we can take the data in the vendor records and swap the data from one field into another in the tool swap field data. So to do that is quite simple. We just say we want to take all the data in the 001 field and put it in the 901 field. And I want to make sure that when I get it, I have blank indicators and all of the data goes into a subfield A. Some of that is because the system I'm going to end up loading into, I need to define the subfield I want it to be in. And I also know that I don't want any indicator values. There shouldn't be any for an 001, I know, but it's just better, in my opinion, to define that. So I'm saying to take all of every field in this, I think there's 21 records in this file, change every single 001 into a 901 in the same field so I can use it later. Process that. And it says 21 modifications were made. It's exactly what I wanted to see. And if we glance at the record, we can see that there's no 001 and there is a 901. And it has a subfield A. So it's exactly what I wanted it to do. And another common task in the same workflow is to, for us, is to put in a field in every record that says that is a brief record. These are brief records, and I know I'm going to want to overlay them later. So going into these routines, of course, you kind of want to know what your use case is for the entire file. I'm going to load these records. I'm going to overlay them again in the future. That's just the process I'm in. So I want to add another 9XX that just says vendor generated brief, because that's just the note I use for that. And so I'm going to go back into tools and I'm going to say add/delete field and click on that and the menu pops up. And at Duke, we kind of always put this in the 904 or some defined field. And then I'm going to say vendor generated brief. And it will do that for me. But what I'm going to look for first is this list of additional things I could make the tool do for me as it inserts this. I could say insert it last, or I could insert it before. I'm going to say only insert it if it's not present. It's not going to be, because I know I got this field from a vendor, but I don't want to duplicate things, so I will do that. And then I'm going to hit add field. And it's added 21 fields, which means they put one in per record, which is exactly what I asked it to do. Not too surprising, but I can go back here and say it says vendor generated brief. I did not tell it to put in the indicators in the subfields, but that was an error and I will fix it. I have this error in the record. I created it, the error, and now I'm going to fix the error. You could have, errors could have come in with a file that you got, but as you saw a minute ago, I made this error. So what I need to do now is go to Tools and Edit Field Data. And I'm going to type in 904, vendor generated brief, which I put in to all of the records that I need to, so that they get, it helps us to avoid sending them out for authority control before the records are ready for that process. And I didn't put the subfields in. Now, if I were a little smarter, I would have copied the information and pasted it here, but I didn't, so I will do this now. So I'm going to put the 904 in. I'm sorry, not the 904. I'm going to start out by saying I want to put blank indicators in, and I want to add subfield A and the note I had I wanted to have. So I'm just inserting the indicator values and the subfield indicator value for this textual field. So because the mark edits text, you can just sort of copy and paste it in here or change it in this way if I didn't insert the subfield spacing by putting those forward slashes in, it would break the mark structure when I go to put it into the ILS. So I want to make sure I make this change. I want to show you how to do that. So I'm going to process it. 21 modifications were made. All those numbers are matching up. And now I have a correctly formatted note in my record. So I can use it. I can load the records and it will work correctly for future processing in the ILS. I'm going to show you so I want to talk more about the edits in MarcEdit, how we can use it to be more efficient in the routines that we have to do regularly over and over again. And we could do that again from the tools menu. You can see that there's this manage task and this assign tasks. And I will talk a little bit about that more in a second or two, or a minute or two probably. But as you probably saw when I was using these edit commands, these edit routines, there's an opportunity to save the routine. So I'm going to build this, but I'm just going to build one and then like I did before, and then show you what I mean about the saving it. So I'm going to try to remember to do the same one. I do it correctly this time. So what we did is I'm creating a swap field process, and I'm going to copy the task here. And it's been saved to my clipboard, so I can paste it into the task editor. I'm going to hit close because I could run this right now, but I guess wanted to show you how to create the task and then undo it. So I'm not going to process here. If I did hit process here, and I'll do that. So I just swapped 13 001s to 901s. But I didn't actually want to do it yet, right? I'm still building things together. So what you have to do, if that happens to you, you can undo that by hitting special undo. And then it pops the edit task back. That special undo isn't always available all the time in MarcEdit. You have to have run a task to be able to use that, but it's really, really important. A real good tool to have at your disposal. So here I am in my task list, and you will remember that I copied a task to my clipboard. So I'm going to do, under the task action side of the screen, I'm going to create a new task. And I'm going to hit select, and this window is going to pop up, and I'm going to just name it demo 1 because I'm going to want to delete this later. I don't need this task. Normally though, I try to name the tasks clearly enough that I remember what it was I needed to do when I was creating the task. You can see some of them back here. I was deleting bad 001s. I was swapping field data, things like that. So I'm going to hit OK. And it's popped up on my other screen. So I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to say swap 001 to 901. And I'm going to save it. Then if I click here on my list of tasks, I can see it's listed here. And that's basically how you create any task. When you are creating other kinds of tasks. The interface looks different when you're copying it. It's just a matter of the label for the copy. So if I were going to build a task to remove a field from every record, for example, I would input what field I want to get rid of. Maybe I only want to get rid of a specific subfield in that data. Let's see, let's say I want to get rid of all the 521s for some reason, and I want to get rid of all the subfield A's. But only if they say the word summary. And so right now I could fill and replace with, but I don't want to. So what I'm going to try to do is just to remove that text. Now, this data doesn't actually exist in this file. I'm just using this as an example. So, but I can remove the text and run it. And if I wanted to copy this task, I would hit copy remove task. But if I were doing a replace, you have to click copy the replace text task. It's just a little, because this window can do either function, either routine, you need to just tell the system what kind of task you're trying to save. I just wanted to point that out in case you hadn't noticed, and it's not confusing. It's just a little different. So I just want to make sure you have that in your toolbox, in your wheelhouse. So I want to talk more about the creating edits in kinds of MarcEdit, how we can use it to be more efficient in the routines that we have to do. The interface. So now you know the basics of creating and running a single bulk edit routine on a file, then saving it as a task. But often a single file requires several bulk edits. And so you can create and run them one by one if you prefer to do it that way. I do that all the time when I'm testing to make sure the routine that I'm building is working. But I also bundle them together, group them together, so I can run multiple routines on a single file in the correct sequence often. So as we get records to overlay and update and things like that. So we know that if we get a file from a single provider, they're likely to have the same kinds of data change needs. And I want to make sure that I run the same tasks on them in the correct order every time. So what you do is you open MarcEditor, and you don't need to open up a file. You can go straight to Tools and Manage Tasks. And then you create a new task and call it something good like use for demo or use for this file or that file. And it's here. I save it. Then to actually copy the individual components of a task, we click on the component, the task, and say edit task select. We right click on the task box, we copy the edited task action, and then we go back to our new task, we edit it, and we right click on the box again, and we paste the task action, and we save that. And we do that over and over again until we have all of the elements compiled into the new group task that we want. We can make it quite large if we need to. So we have 2 in here now, and that's enough to show you how to do it. One thing I want to point out is that if you have the tasks, the individual components in the wrong order, you can rearrange them by using these up and down arrows. Usually it's because you have more than just 2, but you can understand the concept that way. And so if you want to see the tasks in this assign tasks menu, you can do that by assigning a keystroke. Back in manage tasks, you can choose an individual component task or a big group task. And then you choose under manage existing tasks, assign keystrokes. You hit the select button, you choose your keystroke, and then you assign it. Then you can close the window and see that your task has gotten the keystroke, but you can choose it from this menu too. You can still see all the component parts out here in case you need to use one of them. You can also, once you've got them bundled together, you can delete those individual components and you wouldn't have to worry about the long list. If you are looking at your available assigned tasks and you realize there's one there that you're never going to use again, or maybe it's just you have too many assigned, there's a limit, you can unassign a keystroke in the same way that we assign it by choosing none. And that's how we group in tasks for export and reuse. One of the things that you can do once you've created and debugged and looked at all the tasks and the routines that you normally do is you can share them or you can save them to another file location in case you need to for whatever reason. And I want to show you how I do that. We can go to manage tasks and I'm going to import a task file. It's very simple. You click on those, the import features, then you navigate to your shared task lists. Sorry about the scrolling. So I just want to import the Swank task because that's the file I'm going to work on. And you can see it right here in my list. And that's exactly how to do that. The other way to do it, of course, is if you are the one that created the task, it's basically the same idea in reverse. You export the selected task and then save it someplace where your colleagues can access it and import it for themselves. One of the things I haven't actually shown you yet is how to run a task. And I'm going to do that. It's very easy, but I'm opening this file and I hope the recording clears it up faster than it has before. I know sometimes these records come through in the recording as blurry for some reason. But what I'm going to do now is change quite a few of these fields. So if we wanted to take a look at what the Swank task does, we can edit it. And you can see that there's many things that happen to this file every time we get a Swank set of files. We edit subfields, we add fields, and we swap fields. I'm going to close that though, and close this too, and simply run the macro, the task. And so it's running through and doing all the things I asked it to, and it gives me this little report that says what it did. And how many times it did them. So that's pretty good. And you can log it, you can print it if you need to, but you don't have to. But now the data is back, or currently in the way I want it to be. We've got our proxy prefix in here. We've taken away the 001. We've done all those things that we normally have to do for a file from Swank. And the last thing we do, which I'm sure Natalie already showed you, is we compile it back into MARC. And the MARC files.mrk, you hit save, and you're done. One of the things that you can do once you've created and
well, you know,
debugged, I don't know why it keeps looked doing at all that. Tasks and routines that you're trying to drive me crazy. Sorry about that. At the end, I said that MRK, but a MARC files.mrc. Sorry, I just noticed I misspoke.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. And thank you for showing the group how to compile the file back into MARC. So that is important. Once you use the editor to make your changes, you've got to compile it through the file menu, compile it back into MARC so that you can load it into your ILS. I know we're getting short on time and we want to hear from you. Just want to mention community resources quickly. There is a nice, active, helpful MARCEDIT community. The best resource is the download site, where you can download the software for free. Once it's installed, it's updated pretty frequently. So just make sure to check with your library's IT department on installation and updates if you need permissions. And the next slide just has some picks from Jackie and me on resources. So Terry Reese's, the MARCEDIT creators, his YouTube channel has how-to videos. Terry also did a MARCEDIT webinar series for a different consortium in Illinois, which is helpful. The MARCEDIT listserv is a great resource, and I encourage you all to check out the library carpentry MARCEDIT lesson. It's still in development, but hopefully it'll be added to fairly regularly and expanded. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I know that we covered quite a bit today, and there's a lot that we didn't get a chance to cover, but we want to make sure you at least have a couple of minutes to ask any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Jackie. Folks, if you have questions, please submit them in the chat now. You're also welcome, since this is a small enough group, to unmute yourselves if you'd like to do it that way.
I think that we put our email addresses in the slide, but I'm not positive. If we didn't, we'll put them in the information on the YouTube channel. Yes, I could have. Brandy asked if I ran a task by hitting the keyboard shortcut. I could have done that, but I just clicked the task in the task assigned task lists. I want to apologize for having those two videos run at the same time. It's never happened to me before at all. I don't know what happened.
We practiced and it never happened. Yeah.
we practiced multiple times and it worked fine.
Thank you, Mary, for your nice comment. Yeah. I did want to say, if I can add, I think we might have some e-resource managers here, people who work with e-resources. When I talked about exporting from the MARC records to tab delimited files, I want to mention that in the past, I used it, and actually somebody in Jackie's department uses this regularly. She uses that function to create a spreadsheet of titles that can then be sent up to our knowledge base, which is Ex Libris, to do automatic updates of our holdings. So you might be able to do something like that in your library too. And we're happy to talk more about that if anyone wants to reach out to us here or later.
Yeah. Mike asked how we decide to use edits in the ILS versus edits with MarcEdit. And it's really a matter of scale and possibility. Sometimes we want to make big edits in the data, textual edits. Maybe we're inputting our proxy prefix in every record. That's really hard to do in our ILS. So we don't. We do it outside the ILS. Natalie, you had a few comments on that before, did you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Mike. Yeah, I think that, right, Jackie showed in one of her videos how you can contextually tell MarcEdit to like transform or delete something if it has certain data in a subfield. So you can do that, but in the ILS sometimes, for me, we have Aleph. I don't know if anyone else, and so in Aleph, there are some kind of contextual transformations that we do that are actually, I think, a little easier to do, where we can define, tell Aleph, look for this field. If you find this data, do this to it, transform it, delete it. And so, I tend to use MarcEdit more for edits where I'm doing the same thing to every record. And then when I need to get into more contextual types of edits, I use our ILS. But I think other users of MarcEdit might feel and use it differently than I do. It's just kind of born from my own experience with the tools that I've used at Duke.
Does that make it clearer, Mike? I hope it does. It did to me. Cool. Glad you thought so. I don't see any new questions. Does anybody? I know you can chat to individuals sometimes, but I don't have any. So I put this on the slide. MarcEdit's free, so all of the training on MarcEdit should be free. So if you've learned anything today you think someone else would like to know, please teach them. Please share this with them. And yes, all hail Terry Reese. He's not only a really smart guy, he's a really nice guy. He helped me translate MarcCN. This is used in Chinese libraries through a translator in MarcEdit. He built a CN Mark to Mark 21 transformation for me this spring, so I could load some gift records into the catalog, records that came along with a gift from another Aleph library, which is in China. So if you think it's possible to do it, but you don't know how, reach out to somebody who uses MarcEdit and they might be able to help you.
Jackie and Natalie, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through MarcEdit and show so many different cases, how to run tasks. What I'll do in the follow-up email is include your contact information in case people would like to reach out. Folks, I'm about to drop a link in the chat to our feedback survey. If you want to provide feedback on this session and suggest topics for future webinars, please do so. And again, I just really appreciate these very distilled explanations of how to use this tool that's, open source and very invaluable.
It's not technically open source because only Terry develops it. It is free though. But I think I updated, he sent out updates at least 4 times in the last month. So it's actively being developed. Sorry to correct you, Devin. I didn't want
No, that's helpful.